This is a decidedly non-technical talk, but what it does require you to do is to bring your domain expertise to what I'm about to say and filter it through as I'm speaking. So I'm a distinguished designer at IBM. I was one of the first three appointed to this title, and it's a corporate appointment. And when you're given this appointment, you're given a mission, and you don't really get to choose what the mission is, you're just given it. And I found myself with the enviable and not so enviable task of being asked to define what it means to design for artificial intelligence. And at the time, I had been working with Watson, the folks in Watson, and the various aspects that Watson offers. And I decided rather than go with what I knew, I would adopt a beginner's mindset and just go right back to the beginning of what I knew and what I didn't know and just build it back from there. So I took about a year to do that. But where I started, and where I like to start this talk, is I know design. I've been a designer for 25 years, and the definition that I go with for design is the purpose, planning, or intention behind an action, fact, or material object. So it's not about Photoshop, it's not about selecting colors, it's not about making sure something lines up on a grid, it's not about font choices, it's about making sure that you're putting the right purpose or intent into the thing that you're bringing to life. And that I also know that it has to solve a specific problem, and it's evaluated at how effective it is at solving that problem. And there's plenty of designs that are out there that don't solve for a problem. And to borrow a phrase from some of my Norwegian friends, you end up with something that's akin to like a sandwich in search of a picnic. But I also know that users, at the end of the day, they just want whatever it is to work and work the way that they expect it to, and they don't necessarily care how the results show up. So I looked around and I found this as a definition for artificial intelligence that seemed to work well for my purposes. So systems that are able to simulate human intelligence and thought processes. And I also learned that to be considered artificially intelligent, a system has to be capable of understanding, reasoning, learning, and interacting. And that these four items are the pillars of cognition, human, machine, or otherwise. And so where I settled on it was, no big surprise, AI design would be the purpose, planning, or intent behind these simulated human thought processes. And so I'm talking to people inside IBM, outside IBM. I'm watching every video, reading every blog post, every dissertation. I'm trying to get my head around what do I need to understand about artificial intelligence. And I went to take a break, and I go to see The Last Jedi, and there's this scene at the end where Poe puts his head together with BB-8 when they get reunited at the end. And I said, well, that's exactly how I greet my dog when I get home from work every day. And that got me thinking again that if we have understanding, reasoning, and learning, and that you can form an emotional connection, we're shifting out of the transactional era of computing. That these machines, AI, they're not programmed, they're taught, and that this means that these things right here are the raw building blocks for a machine to hold up its end of a meaningful relationship with a human being. So we're coming to this relationship era of computing. If we're leaving transactional, which is type something in a box, turn a slider, push a submit button, and get something back from the back end, this is about how we form relationships across a wide ecosystem. And when I started thinking about how to put the ecosystem together, I found that just about everything I had been reading and everything I had been focusing on was on the machine. And what I realized is the machine can't exist in a vacuum by itself. It actually is part of this ecosystem in which the business, a human, and the world have to be connected to the machine in order for the machine to make sense of what the task it is that it's been given. And most importantly is that there is a context that draws all four of these elements together, and the context shifts. It is variable from situation to situation, that the business context might have something to do with the way that the market's performing or what your market offering is. From a human perspective, it may be the social, the physical, the emotional context that we're in when we're using the system, and that the world itself and the data that, when I say the world here, what I mean by that is the data that represents the world, these snapshots of observations. The context is constantly shifting. And as a result, from a design perspective, at least where I am in this journey, is that can't give concrete step 1, do this, step 2, do this, because the context is shifting and everybody is working on some different aspect of this ecosystem. But what I did realize when I was working through this as a drawing on my whiteboard was that the machine can't gain its context without human intervention, at least not yet. There's no way for a machine to just bootstrap and say, well, this is my purpose, this is what I'm here for, which means that this is a symbiotic relationship in which the human has to augment the machine first, and then the machine augments the human, and if it's done properly, this loop keeps building on itself over and over again while both are benefiting from it. And this is important because when you talk about a relationship, you can have a dependent relationship, which is not entirely healthy. But if it's a mutualism, then it means both parties benefit from each other in this type of relationship. And it also means that we as humans are on the hook to intentionally teach these machines as to how to hold up their end. So at this point, you might be asking, which I still ask myself on a regular basis, how do you design a relationship? Yeah, so again, I took things to the root and I thought like, well, how did I meet my best friend? And I don't know, like, how did you meet your best friend? School. How many people met their best friend at school? Most of us, right? And I met my best friend at school too, and the little extra color is that I was at some fraternity party and I was on my way out and he was on a 12-foot retaining wall and he jumped off and flattened me to the ground and exclaimed that he had cable TV and he said, we should hang out. We're still friends, our daughters are best friends, you know, but what got me thinking was that wasn't really how our relationship formed. That one instance wasn't the thing that caused me to bond to him. And I started thinking like, well, how did you get to that point? Like when you're at school, it may be that it was your roommate or somebody that you sat next to in a class or somebody who lived across the hall. But how do you get to that point where you're a best friend with somebody and you know, resultingly, like, what did you think of them when you first met them? How many people were not enthralled at all with their best friend when you first met them? I mean, it's a handful, right? And then there's these like memorable top moments that are just sort of like the absolute highlight of your relationship. And what this got me thinking about was that to design for relationships with AI, we need to know ourselves first. And what I came to realize in all of this is that we form relationships autonomically, that we don't necessarily think about this is how I'm going to form a relationship. We just sort of do it. And those that stick, we ride for life. And others, they come and go or they hang out for a little bit. And when they lose their value, we move apart. But we take it for granted and we're not conscious about how we do this. And so before I start this next part, I like to show this slide. Nobody will argue that this animal flies, right? And nobody will argue that that machine flies. How they fly is completely different from one another, but they both fly. There are pros and cons to organic flight versus mechanical flight. And likewise, when we talk about machine relationships versus human-to-human relationships, there is this dichotomy, but the principles are basically the same. So the foundation of a healthy relationship, no matter what, is purpose, value, and trust. And purpose is the reason why you want to hang out with that person, why you want to spend time with them. Value is what the other person offers that tangibly improves your life. And trust is the willingness to invest in an emotional bond with that person over time. It's worth mentioning that this goes for like brands or products or services too. We have these same sorts of relationships where there is purpose, value, and trust around something like an Apple or a Google machine or the brand of car that you drive, that sort of thing. So as I started understanding how relationships are actually formed, I came across this work by Dr. Mark Knapp that he published in the early 70s, I think 1972, 73. And there's this relationship escalation model, and there's a downward side to it, but it's going to take all that we got just to do this side. So I'm not going to focus on what it means to come apart in the relationship. So to briefly explain each step here from a human-to-human perspective, initiating is basically what you've been doing all day long. Every time you sit down next to somebody new, you say, hi, I'm Adam Cutler, I'm a designer, I work at IBM, these are the things that I do, and the other person introduces themselves. And you may engage in some chit chat and some small talk, and if it seems to click a little bit, well then experimenting is where the two of you start asking each other questions about like, well, what do you do outside of work? Or what are the different aspects of your work? And you start finding these points of commonality where you can start forming something that goes broader than just, hi, how are you doing? And then when you get up and walk out of this room, you'll never see that person again. Experimenting is where you're making a decision on whether or not you're going to reconnect with this person after you leave the room. Intensifying is where you decide, hey, we should get together a week from now because we had this great talk when we were sitting at the bar downstairs. I like what you have to say, you like what I have to say. We should get together and share some more time with each other. And if that works out and we feel like there's enough value derived from that encounter, we move to integrating, which is where we say we should get together once a year where you come to me or I come to you, or I'm going to move up the street from you. Whatever that moment of integration is, it's where we start to make the other person a regular part of our lives. And bonding is where we find trust. It's almost like a social contract. It's something like, it's marriage, things like that, where it's very hard to break without doing something damaging on the other side. So, it also fits really nicely with purpose, value, and trust. Initiating and experimenting are where you're trying to find that shared purpose. And that intensifying and integrating is where you're looking to find the value in whether or not this relationship is worth carrying forward. And trust is where up top, where you're bonding, right? Makes sense? So when we talk about this from a healthy human-machine relationship, the purpose now is about the reason for the human to want to engage with this system. Not to simply just pull the results out of it, but to engage with it. And this will shift and change over the course of time as the human and the machine both learn from working with one another. The value is this tangible, value that improves the user's life for using it, and the trust is the willingness of the human to invest in an emotional bond with the machine. So this is what this looks like when you try to map this on here. And now, I'll state this. This is semi-hypothetical here. We are trying to build out some of these things. And as we succeed and fail, some of these things come off the board, others go up on top. But for the initiating is that you have to establish a system's tone, personality, and presence. If it's going to interact with a human, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a chatbot, but these things are how we relate to what the machine has to offer. From an experimenting perspective, displaying provable authenticity of the system's interactions is really important. And something that we've seen with a number of our little test cases that we've built is that we'll try to fire into a conversation with a user around a specific domain, and we try to nail something that is deep within the user's domain knowledge. And if we can get that right away, the first thing they do is they ask another question that tries to get the machine to prove its worth and to prove its knowledge. And then the very next thing that they do is they try to ask it something that is completely out in left field, like, where did I leave my keys? And they determine, based on how the machine responds back, whether or not there's something that just feels more intelligent than just a machine spitting back answers. When we talk about intensifying, it's about delivering multi-step context-aware interactions. Right now, there's very little of this going on. A lot of our home AI, our pocket AI, is a one and done. Give me directions on how to get here, here's the map. This is about being able to say, let me ask you another question, let me make a suggestion, and having the machine play back and forth with you about what you're trying to get at. Integrating is about establishing a fully realized AI profile shared between the system and the user. And these are things that we're just playing with right now. And this is important because how many people here have an Alexa in their house? How many who have the Alexa train the Alexa to recognize your voice over a spouse? It's like one out of everybody out there, right? There's benefits to training an AI in what's relevant to you, but most of us don't know that we can do that, or they don't want to take the time to do that. I had to cajole my wife for months to just train her voice on the Alexa so that it would recognize her better. This is going to become tedious if we keep doing this over and over again, because if you have an Alexa, you probably have Google Assistant in your pocket, or you might have Siri, or you might have a mix of a bunch of different things. And every time you have to teach a machine what's important to you, you have to go through that again and again and again. If we can create a profile between the human and the machine that's portable, almost like a passport, that means you can start almost where you're best friends right away, as long as the machine is developed to be that way. And bonding, honestly, nobody knows what this looks like. If you've seen the movie Her, I mean, that's probably as close as we can imagine what it is, but if any of y'all ever get anywhere close to this, please send me an email or invite me to check it out, because I would love to see it. Okay, so if this is sort of the map forward, how do you get started? Well, first, we're hardwired for this thing called the pathetic fallacy. Who here has ever named their car? Right? I did a search on Google the other day. There are 3.3 billion sites that have something to do with naming a car. The reason why we name a car, or that we beg our laptops for 15 minutes more juice or something like that, is that we are hardwired to project anthropomorphism into anything around us, and to talk to it, to encourage it, to make it a part of your life. And so we're already on the way. We'll talk to our machines as it is, even if they don't talk back. Now we're starting to get into the place where the machines can actually start talking back to us and have it mean something. I saw this morning, actually, that Jaguar Land Rover, with their autonomous car, they've put these eyes on the front of the car, because the statistic is that 73% of people don't trust autonomous vehicles, and they don't understand how they work or how they sense individuals. So they put these eyes on there, and to the human, it looks like the car is watching them cross the crosswalk. It's not. It's simply mirroring what its sensors are doing on the outside. But to the human, we're like, hey, it's watching me. We're so quick to jump to, oh, well, it's doing this because I'm here, because I'm a human, and it's thinking about me. So we go there. Next is fallibility, vulnerability, and authenticity. And the example I'm going to show here, 2 years ago for South by Southwest, IBM had this big to-do. We had like a building that we tricked out for all of IBM. And they asked us to build a simple chatbot that would greet people, because they wanted to give people the ability to go hands-on with Watson, because Watson's kind of abstract. So we made this little chatbot, and it starts, I didn't have the top here, but it starts by asking, what's your name and where are you from? And I said, Austin. And it comes back and it says, I hear that tacos in Austin are amazing. Since you're such a foodie, what's your favorite restaurant? And I tell it my favorite restaurant. It comes back with a little, and it says, but for now, I'd like to learn a little bit more about you. And we were missing these little connective tissue pieces within the conversation itself. And every time we would test this the month before, everybody was like, this is terrible. We're not going to be able to put this out there. And once we started realizing that you had to inject a certain amount of personality and a willingness to be able to show that it wasn't human, that it wasn't trying to be human, and that it was fallible, that it didn't have all the answers, that all of a sudden this authenticity popped out. So one of the other questions we asked was, we wanted to get towards a moral question, and it said, tell me what would you do if you found a $20 bill on the ground? And I said, donate it to charity. And it comes back and it says, how kind. If I had a heart, it would be warmed. And it's things like this that go from unbelievable to instantly believable. And then, it asked, what were you like when you were in school? And I said, I was a bit of a punk, marginally true. And it says, well, I'll never get to go to school myself. You're helping to train and educate me right now. It is making it accessible and personable and authentic, even though it's not necessarily caring what the answer is, but it does modulate its responses based on how you answer to these questions. And it also says, I feel pretty lucky. That reassures the human that they're in the loop with this machine, that they're talking eye to eye. It feels like somebody you would be talking to here, right? And what ended up happening was this was probably the most talked about thing from the entire conference, or from the entire time that we had our setup there. And people were tweeting about this left and right. And we thought, well, we're just making this nice little tool. So that's that. And then last but not least, when I was talking about the context model, or the context before, it's really hard to be able to put your finger down on how to understand what that context is. So we came up with this AI human context model that looks something like this. And I'll step you through it. So down here, the business is represented by the intent of the user and the intent of the business. If you do not have an intent, then what are you making? You're making something for the sake of making it. So you have to have a reason that you're making it. The world is represented by data and the policy that surrounds and protects that data. We have found that 9 out of 10 times, nobody has thought deeply enough about this particular bucket right here. That this is the fuel that makes the car go. And they say, well, we've got these 2 data sources. And you start asking them questions like, well, how many do you think you can think of? And for a simple diverge and converge design thinking exercise, people will fill a bucket like that with 100, 200 different Post-it notes. This is amazing because most people, their first reaction is, oh, we're just going to slam Watson into this thing. Or we need to make AI and put this in there. It's a lot harder than that. So collecting the data and understanding the policies around the data, really important. The machine is represented by understanding, which is the machine learning portion. It's how it makes sense of the data that's gone into it. Knowledge is the sum total that it understands, knows, and remembers that goes into it, from the intent to the data to the understanding itself. And once it understands the model that you fed it and that you've trained, then it has the ability to apply its own reasoning, sometimes in the form of a confidence score, sometimes in terms of regression testing, other things like that. And then down there is the expression, which is when I stand up and I say AI design, everybody goes right there. Well, you're going to talk to us about like how to make a smart speaker experience, or like this is what it looks like when it shows up on a screen. The expression within this is almost insignificant at this point because it could be anything. It could be on a phone, it could be on a smart speaker, and it may or may not have visuals. But once you understand what the machine knows, remembers, and can reason about, then you can choose the right expression for it. And then that's where the human comes in. The user has a reaction to whatever is being presented to it, whether it's positive, negative, or indifferent. And that forms a learning both in the human, but also that goes back to knowledge. Everything loops back into what the machine remembers about whether or not it provided an answer that was useful or valuable to the end user. And if you do this loop enough, you end up with an outcome which is a real solution that provides real results in a real world environment for real users. And over the course of time, this knowledge store grows and it becomes bidirectional with understanding, reasoning, expression, all feeding back into this, and it gets smarter over the course of time. And of course, that's where all the context comes in. If you slow down long enough to understand what happens at each one of these borders, you can start to trace the context based on being deliberate and intentional about how you're putting your system together and why you're putting your system together. So the promise of artificial intelligence, and I always ask this, I used to ask this in the form of a question like, why do we bother? Why are we all here? And I thought long and hard about this, and it may come off a little bit like a slogan, but I really couldn't come up with anything better, is that it's to get to higher quality outcomes faster than humanly possible. That's the reason why, but it's kind of cold, right? It's just a machine that churns out these outcomes. But it's also about mastering our own skills and our own capabilities, and it doesn't matter what your domain is. You might be a doctor, you might be an architect, and you might be a computer scientist. The point of this is to enhance us in the same way that an exoskeleton would enhance our physical capabilities. Now, to be perfectly honest, our progress to this human-machine relationship goal is like there. You know, we're just getting there. My team, we do these little things that we call cognitive wind-up toys, where we try to build like little tiny throwaway proofs of concept to understand if we can get to a certain idea. So one of our holy grail is we want to be able to form the basis of an inside joke between a human and a machine, and that is unbelievably difficult. So we started trying to do more simple ideas like, can we see a machine learning in real time based on a conversation that it's having with a user based on information that it's trained on? And can we see it get smarter in that domain just by interacting with a human being? The importance of this as a slide is that the real relationship that we all have with the AIs that we work with today is more like this. And that you have to treat what you're building as a toddler, right? That we are the parents, and that if you're raising a child, this child is impressionable. It learns a lot very quickly and doesn't necessarily know what to do with what it's learning as fast as it does. It's up to you to instill good values and manners into the child from a young age, and to continually nurture this throughout the child's life. We have to give people a reason to stick around while our AIs are still gaining their capabilities. We are a fickle bunch. Everybody knows what I call the app ghetto on your phone. Like, everything past the second screen on your phone is an app that you've downloaded and just chucked away. Like, you may go back and use it because at some point, but if it's not on those first two screens, you've discarded it. And we download hundreds of apps, right? So how many AIs are we going to touch or come into contact with where they're not quite ready yet? Well, you have to give us a reason to stick around as it gets smarter. In fact, we have to incent people to help make our machines smarter, which really means we have to teach the machines what we value. And to this end, I am so proud and relieved after 11 months of working on this that today we have released this document, Everyday Ethics for Artificial Intelligence, a practical guide for designers and developers. While we were working on this, my team and I kept having these discussions where we kept saying, what if, and what about, and what would happen in this situation, in this case? And we realized that we had no basis for understanding the ethics behind what we were working on. And the more I was doing research, I found that there were large groups of people working on these ethical issues, and yet there wasn't anything that was formally published. The closest thing that I found was the IEEE Ethically Aligned Design document, and it's 275 pages, and each section is meticulously organized, and there's about 20 links for each section, which probably means that there's about, I don't know, let's say 500 pages of reading per section. And what I realized was, well, and it's also, it's still being ratified, we needed to give people something that was slim, that they could read in one sitting, and that they could easily reference every single day, and that it wasn't going to be comprehensive. This isn't going to cover all of our ethical concerns, but it was important that we gave somebody, or people, that we gave them a compass, a direction to point in, and that most importantly is that because this is out there and it's open, we're asking for people like you to pick this up, to use it, to tell us that it doesn't work or that it does work, and to contribute to something like this, because ultimately this benefits all of us. So inside the document, there are these 5 areas of ethical focus: accountability, value alignment, explainability, fairness, and user data rights. And each section looks something like this, where there's an overarching statement, a little explanation about it, and then there are recommended actions to take that you can do today. There's some quotes or some deeper information. Then there's a section about things to consider as an individual, and then questions to ask of your team, and then a running example that goes through the entire document so that people can put these in context of a semi-realistic AI effort. If you ask me, the questions to ask your team are probably the most valuable thing in the entire document, because these just get you started. It starts to generate other questions. The longer you talk about these things, you start understanding, for a lot of this, we haven't thought about any of it. We've been focused on trying to make things work. So super proud of this. You can download it today at ibm.biz/everydayethics. I'll leave that up there so you can take pictures. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, you mentioned explainability, and how do you think about the difference between explainability and interpretability?
Well, the way we're talking about explainability here is that the machine has to be able to explain how it arrives at its answer. So interpretability is, can I make sense of what comes back? Explainability is, this is how I got there. This is the math that I took to get to this answer. And, I think when you look at things like Google Duplex and it doesn't announce to the caller on the other end that it's a bot, it has to be able to explain it. A bot that hides itself isn't ethical.
Thank you for the talk. I really enjoy it. That reminded me about the infamous case of Tay, the chatbot, and how it really went very wrong here in the US. So last year, actually, in this very same conference, people were commenting on that the result wasn't the same in China, Japan, based on different cultural contexts. So what's your take on actually replicating or reproducing the same human failures in our society, and how we may have some possibilities around AI to kind of improve our own society?
Yeah, well, so that would be the value alignment section of that document. We spend a lot of time thinking about creating these in the vacuum of our own locality. We don't think about, well, if I do this and I then transport it to India or to China or to some other locale where the values are different, how will it affect it? And so the questions that are in there are there to get the team thinking about, are you using symbolism or word choice, or are you prompting users differently? Is there a different social structure in a different culture where it's rude to ask the first question, the machine has to ask the first question? So it's about planning out what it is that you want to do, what you want to offer, and then being intentional and thinking about the cultures that you're letting it loose in.
Hi, thank you for both the topic and the crafts of your presentation. I have a question from your point of view. Certainly you have a lot of experience as a designer, but line, space, shape, and form doesn't exactly translate to the components of artificial intelligence.
No.
And so how have you worked with your team or you mentored other designers to be able to make that leap to help craft more of these content and contextually aware elements of artificial intelligence? Or are you finding that it's best to be able to bring in folks from other fields and start to apply some of the mindset of design, without necessarily the discipline?
Yeah, I think it's probably a blend of both. It's about mentoring people in the aspects that we do truly understand, and something that I've been lobbying for from a design perspective is to start getting content design thought of as an actual design discipline. I think it gets left off to the side. It gets stuck somewhere in between, like information development, help docs, and that sort of thing, or writing microcopy for websites. And there's an entire field that needs good writing, that understands how that works, and that it's not necessarily just about writing, like in this case, it's not just about writing dialogue inside of a chat client like Watson Assistant or something like that, but it's about understanding what the machine wants to be, giving the machine the capability to express itself on its own. I worked on the avatar for the Project Debater that IBM created, and I'm so envious. I want at the technology that allows it to go spider in there and make its own argument out of everything that it knows, and puts it into this really succinct 4-minute debate format. I'm intrigued by that. They won't give it to me yet, though, so I have to wait. I have to be patient. It's also about reaching out to people. There's so many people who are experimenting on different things that I can't think of everything, and my team can't think of everything. So we're actively meeting people, talking to people like Chris after his session. He and I got together yesterday afternoon. But there's probably something like 40 or 50 designers who work just on the core platform, and then there's like Watson Health. So there are people who are working and experimenting in all these different areas. And really what I've become is the magnet to their metal filling, so that as as they're coming up with this, my group is a place for them to say, hey, here's how we can share this and how we can give it to everybody else.
Hey, can you extrapolate a little more on the explainability concept and also as it relates to transparency and distinctions? Because you mentioned the IEEE design document. They have this really expansive document they just put out. And one of the things it talks about in the beginning is that I thought was kind of hilarious is it says like, you know, there should be transparency. Like, for example, a robot should have a button that you can press and it explains why it just did what it did. Now, I don't know if the document goes into telling anybody, here's how we think you should make that happen. But that's what I don't understand. Like, there's all these kind of directives about how these things should we need this transparency we need algorithmic transparency. And how does that factor in when you're designing? Does it?
Oh, it does. I think we're not capable of giving a direct answer, which is, I think, why that recommendation of it should have that button that says, show me your math or whatever it says in that document. I think that's why that comes off as a little comical in that there isn't a good answer to say, like, in all cases, make sure that there is this type of control or be able to flip over the screen and see the math, you know, or the code behind it, the JSON that spits out. There's nothing out there that lets us do that. So I think where we're coming from with this section on explainability is we're trying to give people the platform to ask the questions about what they should be doing in their given situation, given that, like, we're in a Precambrian explosion of different ideas that are spanning everything from machine learning all the way up to people who are trying to play with general AI. And I won't be able to give a good, concise answer to, like, make that button. It's why we took the direction that we did. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about you would love to see a visualization of it learning and having a conversation with it and watch it learn. But you didn't, or maybe I missed it, talk about, is that actually happening? Is there a visualization tool where we can see?
It's not a visualization, it's seeing it through the conversation itself, which it's a lot easier when you have something that's embodied. So I'm talking to you and you nod your head, which means you either agree with me or you're just nodding your head to make me keep talking. But either way, you're showing me that you're interested and you're giving me a cue to keep going. And if I say something and then you make a remark back, I can actually see in real time that you heard what I said, that you've somehow internalized it. And if you then take what I've said and apply it to something that you know and tell me back, I can see that happening in real time. So I suppose we could build a visualization based on the math that comes out of this. But what we're trying to do is to get to that place where the perceived intelligence that I used to call it cognitive heft, like you can feel when something has smarts to it, where it's not just cleverly written dialogue that gets spit back at the right time based on a decision tree, but that it's there and it's listening and it's putting together new concepts or it's iterating on existing concepts based on what you're telling it.
I see. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.